has the virtue of putting things fundamentally very often. The thesis that there is at any instant exactly one physically possible future. That's the view of determinism. Now, it's more familiar to most of us in the guise of Laplace's demon. This is Pierre-Simon Laplace writing in 1814 and giving us the image that more or less governs the thinking of certainly philosophers who think about determinism, and I think physicists too. Laplace imagines an intellect which at any given moment knew all the forces that animate nature and the mutual positions of the beings that comprise it. If this intellect were vast enough to submit its data to analysis, could condense into a single formula the
You can watch that, of course. I just put that on. He's great. I could watch him for a long time.
Minutes.
Hours, really. And read his. I think I have all of his books, so that's. But the flip side to that is Jean-Paul Sartre. Did anyone have any questions on Thompson's article? Do I even remember where it is? I didn't leave a bookmark there. I don't think.
629.
629. Art kinds. What sort of thing is a work of art? Psychology of the individual, unfamiliar kinds, and new kinds of art. Some of the stuff she talks about, like, I didn't even look it up, but I gather there are some art, some examples of art that she talks about that like rots over time, so that eventually it's going to be not even there. And the rotting is part of the art. And there's some things besides like the Oculus Rift and the tilt brush where you're in the art, but it's only there provided you have the right equipment to see it. I remember once in the Hirshhorn Museum, if you've ever been there in D.C., the one time I was there, my wife just went to the bookstore. She didn't want to see it because we had seen it before. The kinds of things that were there, they change, of course, the displays that they have, but she didn't want to see them. But I wanted to see it, and I took my camera and ran through and took pictures. And the one art, I went in the door, and I didn't read what the panel said. I just went in, and it was a dark room, and I'm walking in there looking, where is the art? And a guard in the dark says, "Sir, you're in the art." So I froze, and I was like, "So where should I go?" And she says, "Back here." And I'm trying to, you could hear her, so move back that way. And what the panel had said was, go in just a little ways, let your eyes adjust to the darkness, like 5 minutes or so, and then you'll be able to see the art. And I had just walked right in, and I was basically standing in whatever the light was doing. So, but I didn't have 5 minutes to stand there and let my eyes adjust, so I said, "Oh, thanks," and I left. But that's another example of, where is the art? Or one whole room was just a huge white room, white walls. Hanging from the ceiling was this one crystal with a light shining on it, and the artwork was the light going through the crystal and reflecting on the wall.
You wouldn't necessarily have to pay $1 million to go see that. You could just hang that in your living room window.
Most of us do, actually. So, I don't know. But I remember one of the silliest things, it was on 60 Minutes. They had a special on modern art. And there was this one art show that was in Florida. The only way you could get there was by flying in your personal jet. It's not like you could drive to it. The only entrance to it was the runway that was made for small personal jets. So only millionaire, billionaire type folks could come to this artwork. But 60 Minutes was there with, you know, their camera crew. Well, the one example of this art that they had on display was a IV pole, typical IV pole from a hospital, that the artist had taken a 30-foot long orange extension cord and just kind of wrapped around this IV pole, and that was the art. And I remember another one was like a little wooden step ladder that you could have in your typical garage that had paint all over it, that had splattered, you know, from use. And that was the art. And there were millionaires, billionaires there spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on pieces like this. Isn't this obviously a scam? Totally a scam. Remember, faking it. You know, the Roger Scruton's lecture on faking it. You know, that we've got critics paying, you know, homage to this stuff and making it out to be the next great thing, and the millionaires actually spending money on it. And here's the amazing thing is that some of the some of the great art that they buy, that they spend lots of money on, 25 years later is worth 30, 40 times that.
That's the question. Does it really matter what they're investing their money in? As long as people find value in it, it really doesn't matter.
They make more money investing in stuff like that than they do in the stock market and the things that we might be able to invest in, you know, if you're doing that. So they buy this stuff. Some of the stuff is crap, and it will remain crap, and will never be worth anything like what they paid for it.
Right, that's beside the point.
But they're gambling in the same way that you might on anything of that sort. And the times that they win, it's well worth it to them to go to these things. And they're gambling on the psychology of that artist. Is that artist a Ubermensch that's going to be able to persuade people to believe this, or are they just out of their league? That kind of thing. Okay. But so, in contrast with, and I think it is a contrast, because Daniel Dennett is arguing that despite the fact that science today tells us that everything is caused and everything is deterministic, and in fact the language of science requires that. You can't say, you know, what happened here? Well, Stephen Paddock, you know, takes all of his guns, you know, to the room. He takes all the ammunition to the room. You know, all this stuff happens, and no one would have been shot or anything, except all of a sudden, an evil event occurred, and he decided to shoot everybody. So, like magic, dark magic occurred. He was possessed by evil. Yeah, I think. Do you remember the movie Donnie Darko? How many folks saw the movie Donnie Darko? Few. So none of the same people did see it. So. Donnie Darko.
It's one of those movies you have to watch a few times before you really understand what the hell is going on.
So here's a trailer. So what year was this? 2000 something?
2001, I think it's in.
Contemplated with him all his life, pondered through the seasons. Now, in his 15th year, crystallized with the pain of puberty.
I remember the music just makes my hair stand on
My
it.
mom had to get a restraining order against my stepdad. He has emotional problems. those two, what kind of emotional problems is your dad have?
I met a new friend.
Real or imaginary?
Imagine.
I'm going to tell you a little story today about a young man whose life was completely destroyed by these instruments of fear.
I don't see it stuff.
Donnie is experiencing what is commonly called inhalant hallucination.
I have to obey him. He saved my life.
Have you ever seen a portal?
Has he ever told you about his friend Frank, the giant money rabbit?
What?
Why are the things in French?
And if you could see your path or channel, then you could see into the future, right?
I'm not going to be able to continue this conversation. Don't worry. You got away with it.
What is going to happen?
There are only a few days left before they catch me. We're just gonna stop. You should help me.
So, Donnie is a typical high school child, young man, perfectly middle class, normal family. One day, a jet aircraft flying over their house drops a jet engine on the house. Am I remembering this right?
Mm-hmm.
Just so happens that at the time that that happens, he was out riding his bike up on the hill, and he saw what happened to his house, but he was safe. Had he been in his house, he would have died. That much is right. So starting from this point on, everyone that comes in contact with him starts having evil things happen to them. And he's the reason for it. And of course, this is scaring him. He's actually seeing this creature, and he doesn't understand. It's obviously not normal. He does try to report it to people. No one can really seem to help him. Even Drew Barrymore. Imagine, she can help whales, she can't help this guy. Sorry. That's terrible. I shouldn't have made that. So, in any case, he comes to realize that the reason everything that's happening to his friends that's just ruining their lives, people dying and everything, is because he was supposed to have died when that jet engine crashed on his house. And he's basically created a rift in the universe of some sort, a portal. So if you've watched the movie more than once, you can help me on this, right?
You're doing well so far.
I'm doing okay. Okay, so he's created this rift, and the only way he's going to be able to save his friends is by going back into time and being in his house when the engine falls and dying. And he's able to do it. So he's actually accomplishes this. And so at the end of the movie, sorry if I'm ruining for you, you know, everybody's all upset because Donnie just died in his house, and yet at the same time, they're all back. They're all so he's actually
his girlfriend, like, she got run over by a car, you know, and like, so when he sacrifices, that doesn't happen to her.
she's back.
But what's interesting is that, like, she had, like, at the beginning of the movie, she and her family moved to town. Nobody knows her, and that's after the jet engine. So then when he actually is in the spot, he dies, and she comes in. What's going on? She doesn't know. She just got there, and then she shares this moment of, like, waving to his mom, like they somehow know each other, even though it didn't actually happen. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Okay, so So basically, the plot says that here's an individual that comes to realize that the best thing he can do for his friends is kill himself by reversing time. Strikes me that the plot is exactly the opposite of an older movie called This Is a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart.
Oh yeah, I never thought about that. But you're
Remember?
right.
Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah.
How many of you seen that?
If you haven't seen it, you've seen parodies of it.
One person. One person.
I don't think I've actually seen it, but I've seen. I mean, throughout my
So-
life, like how many cartoons and shows and stuff. Have
Yeah,
parodied
yeah.
it.
So this is an old movie. It's kind of a Christmas timey movie. Jimmy Stewart ends up in a small town. He's the head of a savings and loan. He's having middle-aged thoughts about his life. You know, he's got all these wonderful children. He's got a beautiful wife. He's an important person in the town, but he feels like he's left the adventurous life to his brothers and stuff. You know, he's just not had a good life, and it seems like everything's falling apart for him. And he's crashed into a tree. He's upset, and he decides to kill himself by jumping off of a bridge into a stream. But when he jumps in, his angel pulls him out. So a miracle, right? His angel pulls him out of the stream and saves him, and tells him, you know, so if you think your life is so terrible, let me show you what the town would have looked like if you hadn't been here, right? So they go back and they now see Twin Falls, or whatever the name of the town is, without his being there. And the town is terrible. None of the people that he gave loans to have houses. You know, he doesn't have kids. His wife is a spinster that's totally upset, you know, et cetera. And so all these wonderful things turn out to be totally gone. Notice just the opposite of with Donnie Darko, right? And so he realizes how wonderful the life was, so he decides to come back. So he doesn't commit suicide. He comes back. His angel has saved him, right? And everything works out. Everything, right? So I'm looking at these two movies and saying, okay, so here's maybe 50 years. Our culture has changed, where on the one hand you've got a movie that's telling you, no matter how normal and everyday you think your life is, it's actually wonderful. If you had the chance to step back and look at all the things, the interconnections that you've made with society, how everyone loves you, everyone's been dependent on you, your family, etc. You have a wonderful life, no matter what you might think, you know, depresses you about it. You've had a wonderful life. But the new movie, that's kind of, that's what, 16 years ago? Talking about our modern attitude, says, gosh, you know, your friends and all your relatives would have all been so much better off without you. That's the plot of the movie. But in both of them, there's kind of a magical intermediary. You know, on the one hand, it's the rabbit-like horror thing in Donnie Darko, and with Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life, it's an angel that steps in. But magic doesn't really happen, does it?
No.
Science doesn't allow it. You can't have magic. A scientist can't say, and a miracle happens here. And they have, you've ever seen, he's got an equation, he's got this equation all the way across. And right here, a miracle happens. And then this happens. Science is not allowed to talk that way. So if that's the case, we don't have free will, because free will, in at least one sense, seems to require magic. You have free agency that's not attached to the previous causal chain of events. Sartre comes in with what I thought was an absolutely fantastic idea. Of course, this was back in the 70s. So remember, he has, based on Hegel's conception of the en sich and the für sich, or the in itself and the for itself, we have in French the en soi, and we have the pour soi. So the in itself and the for itself. The in itself is that subjective side of you that is really you, the one that you can't really see in the mirror because the mirror is the pour soi, right? So all the conceptual schemas that I have of myself that enable me to be self-reflective. So that requirement for you to be a person, that you have self-reflection, and it requires you to have this relationship here, right? Because this is what I think of as me, but the real me is the part of me that's thinking that this is me, right? So there's a gap between these two things. So Sartre says, what is between these two? What's the difference? And the gap is what's there. That's the only thing that's there. And for Sartre, that is nothing. Or nothingness, right? This gap is nothingness. There's nothing between your subjective self and the conceptual schema. Literally nothing. And so freedom enters the world right here. Because of that gap, freedom enters into the universe through human being, through our gap between the subjective side of ourselves and what we think of as us. So for example, I have to decide what I am going to be. What major do I want to be in college? Or who do I want to be married? Can I be married? Will someone marry me as ugly and stupid and whatever as I am, right? I can just ask people. Maybe someone will. Which, by the way, I mean, one of the reasons Don and I are reaching our 45th wedding anniversary is because I'm absolutely positive I could not have lucked out a second time. There's no way anyone else would have even considered marrying me. Having someone like her marry me, I'm going to stick to that all the way. Right? No way. Right? I'll change that. But you're the one that makes those decisions. What decision are you going to make from one moment to the next? You know, should you get up? Should you go to the concert? Will you go to a concert in Las Vegas ever again? Are they going to have a concert in that same venue again? A couple nights after the concert, I think Celine Dion gave a concert, and she paused afterwards and asked people, you know, should I have done this concert? Should you have come? Etc. And she's very grateful that everyone came. By the way, she donated the money to, I guess there's a charity now for all the people that were injured, or wounded, or killed. I don't know what she donated the money to. But those are questions that human beings have to decide for themselves what they want to do. And we can't predict how people are actually going to decide. Because people really are amazing in their ability to decide seemingly for no reason at all, one way or the other. Is it magic? Sartre, right? By the way, he's an example of an existentialist. Remember, Nietzsche gives us the same kind of quandary. You have to choose for yourself what kind of life you're going to have. And Nietzsche argues you should be an Übermensch. Sartre does not call you that, but at the same time, he argues every single person is condemned to be free just by being a human being and having this kind of consciousness, a self-consciousness. You're forced to be free. You can't avoid it. Even deciding not to decide is a decision, right? You know, are you going to go to the concert or not? I'll decide tomorrow. That's still a decision for the moment, right? You know, you can't avoid making decisions. And another way I think we could talk about this is if we think in terms of the model-dependent reality. You know, if we have a model for a scientist, it can't include free agency. It's not part of the equation, right? No miracle occurs in the equation, at which point all bets are off, right? Can't do that. But if you're a free agent, if you are thinking of yourself from your perspective, or you're talking about somebody else, what will they do? Will they say yes, right? Or no? Will they spit in my eye, you know, for even thinking about it? You know, will you marry me? What? Got to be kidding! Get away from me! You know, you can imagine, right? Can't tell what they're going to say. I remember Soren Kierkegaard. Did I tell you about Soren Kierkegaard's story of the diary of the seducer? Mm-hmm. What an asshole, you know? You believe it? He did that? So you can't tell what people are actually going to do. And the reason Sartre argues that is because of this gap. That when I'm thinking, okay, well, I want to be a great teacher. Philosophy is absolutely wonderful. I want to be a teacher so I can teach people all about the wonders of philosophy. They think it's so great. So I want to be like this. I couldn't get in, but every step of the way you have to work at it. And you can fail in so many more ways than you can succeed, it seems, to do that. And the thing is, I'm always not that. Because the projection I have of what I would like to be is, I mean, just someday I'd love to write a book, be a bestseller. It's going to be a cross between Harry Potter and Karl Marx's Das Kapital. You already know that's not going to happen, right? no way, you know, that's going to happen, right? But so you imagine things that you feel like just no way, so you don't do it. You know, the first step, you know, on a trip is, you know, falling over your foot on your foot. No, taking the first step, right? That's the first part of the trip, right? Slipping on the step, breaking your leg, and staying home the rest of your life.
Short trip.
Yeah, short trip. You know.
Cut to the bottom of the steps.
But so there's always that gap that you can't seem to fill. On the other hand, that's a practical way of talking. The reason Sartre, by the way, got into this was because of his milieu. I mean, so we might think, wow, he's an existentialist. He's going to have a reason for doing this. And in fact, if we look at his life,
To my nausea, to my full life, I experienced the absolute of the absurd.
oh, this is the tree root. So
In front of this great
you're looking at the tree root and you realize that since I'm free to choose, the entire world is my own responsibility. And once you realize that, you become nauseous, which is the title of one of his most famous books, La Nausea. The whole point is you become nauseous once you realize that all of life is your fault.
toute expérience, que autrement dit qu'on est justifié par rien. Nous sommes contingents.
But he was in France when the Nazis occupied France. He was part of the underground. He was captured, wrote plays while he was captured, and they were even performed during the Nazi occupation, even though the plays made fun of the Nazi occupation. So that's all interesting. But after the Nazis lost, right, the Third Reich lost, remember all the Nazis that were tried as war criminals in the Nuremberg trials. Their main defense was that they did what they did because they were ordered to. They didn't have any choice, right? You know, why did you kill 200 civilians? I was ordered to, right? Can you imagine, right? And by the way, that's a good ethical argument if you are a Stoic. Remember in the possibilities you have that the Stoics, their highest duty was to the state. So if you were ordered to do something, you had to do it because the state was what enabled society to exist. So the functionaries, the bureaucracy that enables the state to function have to do what they're ordered to from the top down. Right? It's a good military ethic. You know, when the general orders you to do something, you have to do it, period. The United States military, of course, has an issue where you feel like if it's an immoral command, you're not supposed to do it. But how do you decide when it's an immoral order, right? And whether or not to follow through, right? Well, you know, you could get into arguments over why we even have that in our courts, in our military court system at all. You could bring up Lieutenant Calley, who was the scapegoat apparently in Vietnam. Anybody familiar with any of that? You know, the My Lai massacre. One village that was basically totally massacred, women, children, old people, everybody. And our soldiers literally just shot everybody and burned them in the grass huts and everything. And Lieutenant Calley was the only one that was charged for that. It was actually pretty clear that it was the entire chain of command that just knew all this was going on, and that wasn't the only village that it happened. But because it got reported, somebody had to go on trial. He was the one that went on trial. It ended up being that he was given 3 days in prison confinement and then house arrest. So basically, don't do that. But still, his career was ruined. But of course, an awful lot of soldiers were there and actually killed babies, took their weapon, put it to the head of the baby and shot it. You know, so they lived with that afterwards. By the way, this was just in the series of videos on Vietnam by Ken Burns. If you
Probably none of those soldiers were in their right mind when they did that as well. However, that's a little argument.
Aren't they feeding them cocaine?
There was a lot of heroin addiction. I don't know if necessarily they were feeding them, but it was available. Yeah.
Just spoon feeding it to them.
No, I thought they put them in the MREs.
we didn't have MREs then.
No.
We had C-rats,
Well, yeah.
canned rations. It's the one Viet Cong guy that was interviewed said, gosh, a typical American soldier had so much food on him, we could have a picnic. Well, so a Stoic ethic says you do what you're ordered to do, so that their defense at the Nuremberg trials was actually a good ethical defense, except that they had lost, and so we imposed our moral point of view, which says you should not kill civilians. And Sartre sees all this and is aware of all this and argues that you are responsible for killing those civilians. You can't get out of it by saying that they ordered me to do it and so I had to do it or they would have killed me. Fine, you're still the one making the decision to kill them. You could have easily said, no, kill me instead. So you're prioritizing your life over those 200 people, if that's what happens, right? So he's thinking, I'm sure, in terms of these Nazi war criminals that are defending their actions by saying that they were ordered to do it. It was not their fault, they were just doing their job. By the way, about the same time as that, we also have Hannah Arendt and the banality of evil. So she was a reporter from the United States. Well, she was actually German, so I don't know how that works. She married an American. Actually, she married a German who also migrated to America, so I guess they're both buried in New York, side by side, on campus, at the only cemetery, I believe, that's on a campus in the United States, as far as I know. And, oh, this is terrible, but do you remember in the movie Son of Einstein, Son of Einstein? No, Son of Frankenstein?
That's a little different.
Frau Blucher? What happens in your head whenever you hear the name Frau Blucher?
Young Frankenstein.
Young Frankenstein. Frau Blucher? Yeah, you hear the horse, right?
Yeah.
No, so, sorry.
Should be the only one that's seen Young Frankenstein.
It's been a long time.
I am Paul Brucher.
Inga, may I present Frau Blucher?
Should have
After
same
you,
shot.
Frau Blucher.
Yeah, they didn't have to show it. It's gotta sound.
Blucher! Good night, Frau Blucher.
They're like far off. Yeah, outside.
Those two. Blucher!
Sorry. This has nothing to do with anything you're doing. But, notice her married name. Is Mel Brooks making fun of Hannah Arendt? You know, she was a notorious philosopher because she was Jewish, and yet at the same time, she said Eichmann was just doing his job. And he was the one that ran the Holocaust. So every Jewish person was basically absolutely horrified in her. She's Jewish, what is she doing? Saying, he was just an ordinary guy doing his job. His job just happened to be in charge of administrating all of the Holocaust camps. So, Israelis killed him, of course. But, shoot, sorry about that. Because, I'm sure it ties in somehow. I hope my mind wasn't that completely out of it to do that to you. So Eichmann. But for Sartre, there's absolutely no excuse. As a human being, you're in charge of every decision you make, and you're responsible for everything you do. You can't blame it on anyone else. In fact, if you blame any of the things that you do on somebody else, that's, oh shoot, there's a name for it. I can't remember the name. Must be after my bedtime. actually in our text too, I think. Let me find it in the text. So, we're condemned to be those who appeal to the wisdom of the people. Oh, this is an interesting line. Which is a sad wisdom. What does he mean by that? That's page 366. This a sad wisdom finds ours sadder still. So, and by the way, this is me. When I studied existentialism, I thought, on the one hand, this was absolutely marvelous because it gives us free agency again. When I'd given that up, I thought, wow, that's depressing. Everything I ever do is a result of all of the previous events that led to this point. So what I've learned, my language, my culture, my parents, my church, my schooling. How many of you feel like you're a free agent? Raise your hand. You have to, right? You can't not raise your hand when you're asked that question, because we're raised to think of ourselves as free agents, even though in science there is no chance. Everything is predetermined. So that's a conflict. That's a very clear conflict. On the one hand, to think we have free agency. On the other hand, science tells us no. In fact, they have functional MRIs now where you can be asked yes or no. And before you make your answer, the functional MRI reads your brain making the decision, and then you find out what it was. And you think that you're the one making the decision. But it was something in your brain that's already been decided. Right.
There's an interesting video on YouTube called You Are Two, and it talks about people whose hemispheres of their brain have been disconnected in some way, and how there's actually two different yous, but only the left side can talk. So the left side is the one communicating with the world, and the right side is sort of has to go along with it. It's really interesting. It demonstrates how your brain works.
That's mostly if you're a male, though. Females, both brain sides work together. The corpus callosum in the females is much larger, so the traffic, both sides, is much more complex. And so if they have a stroke in one part of their brain, they can recover because some other part of their brain can duplicate what that part did. Whereas if you're male and you have a stroke in that part of the brain, that's gone. Right? It won't come back.
Or if you're a child, often. I saw, this was 20 years ago, I saw a thing on this little girl who had a brain disease that took out half of her brain in order to save the other half. And then she essentially did almost like a normal kid. She had no developmental disabilities or anything. It was amazing. How do you just function with half a brain? But she did.
I don't know the answer.
I don't know the answer either. It's fascinating, though.
But people who complain that existentialism is too gloomy a view of things, and I wrote me because years later I felt that way, that this is just really gloomy. But it's not so much our pessimism, but more likely our optimism, says Sartre. And the optimism is that you don't have to be pessimistic in thinking that everything that happens to you is not your fault. It's your fault. So be optimistic. You can change your mind. Right? By the way, he mentions a couple others. Karl Jaspers is a Christian existentialist. Gabriel Marcel they're both Christian existentialists, so they're not atheistic. Sartre points out that he is an atheist, and here's his phrase: "Existence comes before essence." So we can see kind of like a history of this phrase being tossed about in various ways. Remember, Anselm argues that we have faith seeking understanding, and then we have understand in order to believe. It's kind of you have to try to understand it, and then you can have faith, but you can't have faith in it until you understand it. It goes back and forth. You have Aquinas that faith and reason go together. They're like the two wings on which we fly, which I think is absolutely beautiful metaphor. Then you have Descartes that feels that You have essence and then existence. So you start off by being a thinking, I think, therefore I am. So you basically create your existence after that point. And we've got Sartre that flips it and says existence comes before essence. Or wait a minute, he does it just either way, whatever. I don't think it makes a big difference either way. He tries to make it out as if it is. We must begin from the subjective. You're the one that decides. Each man is a particular example of a universal conception. That's Kant, right? Remember, Kant has the categorical imperative, all rational people will make the exact same decision. Sartre says absolutely not, right? Talks about a letter opener or a paper knife. Heidegger's name for this is Dasein. So Dasein. So literally, they're saying that this is Hegel, but it's really flourishes under Heidegger, and literally Da is German for there, and Sein is being. So a human being is being there. You're in a situation, always. So existence precedes essence. What do we mean by saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that man first of all exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. So later on he says, man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. So in La Noce, he realizes, La Noce is a novel, and you find that you're responsible for all men. So even if you feel like, gosh, it's not my fault what's happening in Sudan, but if you feel like what's happening there is wrong, it's your responsibility to actually do something about it. You can't just leave it that way, right? And say there's nothing you can do about it, because there is. Right? Our responsibility is thus much greater than we had supposed, for it concerns mankind as a whole. In fashioning myself, I fashion man. One ought always to ask oneself, what would happen if everyone did as one is doing? If a voice speaks to me, it is so you hear the voice say to you, do such and such. But it's still your decision whether you're going to listen to the voice and do it or not. Right? Gosh, that could be a critique of Abraham, right? Abraham is the one that goes up, to sacrifice Isaac, because he believes that God has told him to sacrifice his only son. Whether you believe it was Isaac or Ishmael, it's up to you, right? Right, there's two different sides to that, right? We talked about that. It's still up to Abraham to do that, whether he wants to do that or not. A priori, that's a technical term in philosophy that literally just means before. This is page 369. You don't have your text up. So I'm going through Sartre. A priori just means a priori before. It's a Latin expression for before, but it's a technical term in philosophy in lots of different contexts. A posteriori is after. For Aristotle, a priori meant basically the premises of an argument, and a posteriori meant the conclusion of an argument. But for Kant, the a priori is the circumstances prior to your being in a situation or having an experience. Kind of an odd thing. I'll show you how this works. So we have a priori is before, a posteriori is after. And then you have analytic and synthetic. So if I've learned in my life that horses are animals, when I actually see a horse, I already know what horses are and their definitions, etc. And so I have a priori analytic information before I have an experience. So if I see a horse, I know what it is, etc. I learned that in a particular event in my life when I first saw a horse. So I had an a posteriori event, which was actually, at the time, new information. So the first time I saw a horse, oh, what is that? That's a horse. Whoa, now I know. I'm a little kid, but now I know what a horse is. Every time after that, because of this analytic a posteriori event, now it's now part of my walking knowledge of what horses are, so I already know. But according to Kant, there's no way for me to have a priori synthetic information because that would be new information before I had it.
That makes sense.
Right? You can't do that. Right? You can't have this. This, though, is the argument that Hume gives for saying that all metaphysics all metaphysical theories like Aristotle's and Plato's are attempts to give the synthetic a priori, which is why Hume says that you can't believe any of those. They're all wrong because you can't have it. So Kant's job in the Prolegomena is to explain why we can still do metaphysics. And it's not just because otherwise philosophers will be out of a job, right? Thomson, upset with scientists saying that philosophers no longer have a job, right? We still have to do metaphysics. It's the big picture. And of course, Kant, remember, comes up with his transcendental method, which says even though phenomena is all we experience, we can transcend that limit and say what must be the case in order for us to have experience. Right? So there has to be a you, there has to be stuff. You're interacting with stuff. It has to be, right? Remember, he also says that there has to be a God, and that's what explains morality. Sartre also agrees, as an atheist, that there is no morality because there is no God in the first place to dictate morality. Instead, you, very much like Nietzsche, have to decide what's moral for yourself. And what you decide, then you're deciding for all of mankind.
So it's like saying that there's no like set list of morals that people would live by. Each person makes their own.
It doesn't come from an entity.
There's no moral authority on high that basically dictates the Ten Commandments, for
It's
example.
kind of like innate, actually.
Well, this is one of the reasons I like Dennett. Is what about our biology? So say for example, the other day I saw a young lady, one of the students here in the Alaska Middle College School, I'm sure. She was so skinny. She reminded me of the girl in the Invincibles, Incredibles. What was it? Incredibles? Remember the one girl with the black hair? Like if she turned sideways, you couldn't see her? That was the way she looked, you know, because she was walking and I could see her, and then she turned sideways and I went, where did she go? And there she was, right? She was so skinny, you know. So she was walking the way tall, skinny people, and you want, how can people live with such little bodies? But they do. And so there she goes walking, right? But I'm thinking, she's walking the way she does because of her physical body structure, and she's going from point A to B. That's not cultural. And I remember when I joined, well, I was already kind of warped by being in the marching band in high school and then in college. So they taught me how to march. And when I joined the Army and they taught me how to march, didn't really seem like much of a leap, right? But probably that affected me the rest of my life because I still walk that way. And I think you can tell when somebody's like, but there are people like some of the people we were talking about earlier that they walk around in town and you look at them and it looks to you, or it looks to me like those people are moving with no purpose. They have no goal of actually getting to a particular place. They're just moving. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And part of it too is like the way they dress, because they like the jacket, they like the pants, they like the shoes, they like the hat, but they had no clue that none of those go together. Does that make sense? So this is fetal alcohol, it seems to me. You know, that's, you know, they like the hat, but it doesn't occur to them that the pattern is like, whoa, that doesn't go. And they don't have a wife that could, I always check with my wife, does this look okay? Because, you know, she has a sense about that stuff. But she said this was okay. It's studiously casual. Right? There are people that walk in a way that seems completely unnatural, especially because they wear their pants down too low.
With their leggings and not pants?
No, I mean they're wearing like pants.
No, I mean they're wearing them so low they're not on their
like their butt is
They're just
sticking
leggings.
out. Their butt is sticking out practically,
So
and they're
wearing
walking
leggings
in a
that are
way.
attached.
They're walking in a way that seems deliberately to stress that I'm a rebel against the status quo.
I actually know where that comes from.
Where?
Prison.
Why?
Because they don't have like these kind of one-size-fits-all thing, and they don't really get too many belts and things like that. So that's part of why it's so loose. The other thing is the wearing your pants down and exposing your butt is code for I'm available.
I'm going to disagree, and I'm going to say I'm old enough to say that when I was in high school in like 1986, 87, I lived in the States, and it was a crip thing. I don't necessarily think it was from prison. I'm just telling you what my experience was.
I know a prison.
I work with reentry as well, but I'm just saying, you know, it's been around for almost 30 years. We were just talking about this the other day. You know, it's everybody's, when you're working, especially when you're working with youth, it's everybody's complaint. It's everybody's, why can't you just pull your pants up kind of argument? Just pull them up. But you know, it's been almost 30 years. I don't think it's going anywhere. You know, it's not like it lasted for a decade, you know, or something. It's a fashion that won't go away. It's a statement, whether it's prison, whether it's whatever, you know.
So it is a statement. So it's a cultural,
it's definitely
culturally learned behavior.
Saying, I'm gonna,
it's not a natural walk.
And it's definitely in a certain age group, you know, but then they grow up to be 30 and 40. I don't know. But I don't think it can be answered. I think it's going to continue. It's going to be the longest fashion statement ever.
But I would still say that biology dictates a lot of what we consider to be moral. Another thing, and Sartre never heard of this, but what we call mirror neurons, right? When I see somebody, even if I'm watching like a movie or something, my mind is designed in such a way that I can feel what they're feeling, right? Right. So, right?
Yeah.
Mirror neurons, right? So it seems like it's only been a recent discovery that we realize when we're looking at the brains and you're watching somebody else that you are literally having the same kinds of feelings that they're having. And they've referred to it as mirror neurons, because we're kind of mirror imaging their emotional state. We can do that, right? And that strikes me as being a main reason why we can't do certain things to other people, because we feel like we're doing it to ourselves, right? Does that make sense? Well, I've got to give you a quick question. Oh, I did give you the one question. What is the hardest decision you ever made? Right?
We've got the first one.
Let me get. So I'm going to go back to Tuesday. Yes. So my first one for the first half is: do you think DNA should be patentable?
Like specific sequences or something?
Yeah. I remember when I first started teaching here in '95, Dr. Lishka had on his office door a certificate of ownership of his DNA. What? Well,
he owns that specific combination of...
Well, he really did. It was just like he made it up. You know, it's not like a real contract with anybody. You know, but the issue of that's how old that was these companies were finding segments of DNA, right? That was before the finish of the Human Genome Project, where they actually just determined the genome of one particular individual who was in the project. It doesn't have yours. Did they ask you for yours? You know, they don't really have yours, right? But they have, okay, here's the human genome, or at least one exemplar of it, right? But as they were trying to do that, they were like finding segments that would be like, oh, this is the gene for hemoglobin, you know, or this is the gene for autism, or well, actually that's actually a spectrum of things that cause autism. But so there's different genes for different things, right? And as they found them, they wanted a patent on that, so that they owned it. But wait a minute, you can't have a patent on a piece of the DNA that all human beings have. You can't own my DNA, that's crazy. But so they got the patents instead for the process by which they could find that and then use that to manipulate things, right? So people like Gen and Tech and other, I don't know how many companies there are, but they're in this process of creating synthetic genes so that you know now they can make they could use stem cells in order to insert viruses that then can deliver genes to.
You've heard of CRISPR?
CRISPR.
Yeah.
CRISPR is like the tool that enables them to nicely slice off that particular segment so that they can basically make copies of it.
That's what's fascinating about it, is like it's not like science fiction. It's like we have the technology right now to do that stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that's
and
the question is what we do with it.
If we don't allow it, by the way, the Chinese are doing it. So don't let the Chinese get ahead of us on this. So that's the first question. And then the second one was, what is the hardest decision you ever had to make, if you don't mind thinking about that?
These are thought-provoking questions, I like.
I'm trying. My wife says I'm pretty trying sometimes. Any questions for me? Otherwise, I guess we're done for the night. Everybody having fun with their thesis, for their term paper? Everybody finished test 1? If you haven't, please send it to me. Let's be safe.
You want us to send drafts of our paper to you?
You can. I can make comments. Usually I'm like, thanks, this is going pretty well. I have like a list. Oh, I haven't.
You copy and paste.
Drag and drop.
Seems cool too.
Hi.
appears to me, I haven't done a lot of research on him, but he's a little bit
Have a
judged.
great night, sir.
Being an atheist?
Being an atheist in some aspects, like the university that are actually
Yeah,
he's pretty judged about.
yeah. It's very elitist, though.
Very elitist, the money he was charging for it and so on, and he was also, and then it turned out that the people that were entering this college didn't have a problem with it at all. So
Right.
it kind of proved him wrong in a way, saying,
Right,
well,
right.
everybody seems to be, you know, standing in line for this kind of school.
I'd love to go.
Right?
The one lecture I think I have is Daniel Dennett lecturing at that. I don't think it's the one I posted.
Well,
But
I'm trying to wrap my brain around how I'm gonna make this paper interesting and not just, you know, taking your ideas, but why I was like interested in him too, because I kind of like.
Braden has written tons of, and he's much more readable than Noam Chomsky.
Right,
Yeah.
I agree with you on that.
Noam is a great linguist, but boy, he seems to have jumped off the deep end in a lot of his critiques, like criticizing the United States as being the greatest terrorist.
However,
I mean, I can see the points he's making,
it's pretty
but
extreme. However,
I'm on sides here. I'm for us.
Well, I'm for everybody. That's
Well,
just me,
yeah,
though.
yeah,
That's just me,
yeah.
though. I see the planet as one big rock floating around the middle of nowhere, and
That's
I
absolutely
don't. I
true.
just don't feel like one of us deserves more than the other. That's just me.
Well, shoot.
One shade of.
I have to admit, I like hamburgers.
Well, it's what I know. However, I had this crazy empathy for the other
And I
part
like-
of the
I
planet
like
too.
my
Like, no,
car.
that's why I didn't.
I
know.
like the concerts.
He has an empathy for everybody on the planet. I identify with that.
Yeah.
And that kind of can go. You can say that can go with a faith, maybe a Christian faith, possibly. Anyway, going off on another tangent. I'm trying to I don't know. I guess I like to make atheists in a different light. I'm kind of passionate about that because I don't like the division that is created when you say the word atheist, because it can be a really bad word in some environments, as far as, attacking, they're always attacking, they're always against, or trying to go against Christian faith, or whatever belief it is. So I kind of am passionate about making atheists look human, because
Not a problem. I've never
Do you
met a
think I
robot
should-
that was an atheist.
But I'm just wondering if
And
I'm
AC
going,
Grayling is an
if
excellent-
I'm going about that the right way to write the paper.
I think we often worry that someone who's an atheist is also amoral.
Right.
Or
right.
immoral.
And I can tell you, in my
And-
experience, that some of the most moral people I've met in my life
Are
are atheists,
atheists.
and some of the most immoral people I've met in my life are Christian. That doesn't mean I'm against anybody that's Christian. I'm just saying, in my experience, I can say that. But should I just highlight things that I find interesting about him?
Sure. It is your project.
Because I don't want to make
Yeah,
it
it's-
boring, though. I hate a boring paper, because I like what you wrote about, please, I can imagine how many of these papers you've read in your experience, and I don't want to write
Descartes was born in La Flèche.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how can I reword this and not, take this exact same information, but not plagiarize it? I really want it to come out of my own thought. So I guess I'll just highlight things that I find interesting about him.
Sure.
And go off on those tangents.
And meanwhile, you're practicing the vocabulary that is the main goal that I have for you.
Okay. All
So
right.
that's terrific.
Okay.